right, next up, Daniel Humm's new 11 Madison Park menu will be meat-free. And this is an article from the Wall Street Journal. This made some waves on the internet this week. So let's talk about this change, why there were applauses, why there were some people being extra critical of this move, and what we can learn from this type of adjustment, especially under this powerful of a spotlight when you're previously best in the world, 3 Michelin stars, 4 stars New York Times, all that sorts of stuff. So, quote, like most fine dining chefs, Humm is best known for meat and seafood dishes. His legendary duck, roasted with honey and lavender, lobster poached in mushroom butter, smoked sturgeon cheesecake with caviar. When it reopens on June 10th, 11 Madison Park will stop serving meat or seafood of any kind and make its dishes exclusively from plants, from vegetables, fruits, and fungi. Currently, there is only one 3 Michelin-starred restaurant that serves no meat or seafood, and that is called King's Joy in Beijing. 11 Madison Park will not count as fully vegan because Humm will allow milk and honey for coffee and tea. Humm struggled a bit with this decision, concluding that he didn't want to deprive guests of pleasures, but to delight them with the possibility of plant-based cuisine. End quote. So, huge change, obviously, right off the jump. This is, the first piece of news that they're doing a plant-based menu, which is basically a far-flung departure from the previous menus where luxury products basically stole the stage. So let me get into one more quote before I go on here. Quote, and this is from Daniel Humm himself. Quote, when we set out on this journey, we promised ourselves that we would only do this if the meal could be as delicious as it was before. My goal is to create these beautiful dishes, give people beautiful experiences, unexpected, surprising experiences that make you feel satisfied as a meal with meat would. End quote. And I think I should start by addressing price points. The people on social media have been putting this on blast and running with it. The first being the price is $335 a person for this plant-based tasting menu. And the second piece is that Daniel Humm isn't the first person to do a plant-based menu. Those are kind of like the two big criticisms that people are gallivanting around with. And the issue is that he's not the first person to do this, and yet for some reason he's getting all this press and he's not deserving of the notoriety because he's a white male chef, blah, blah, blah. So first off, the price point. And they talk about the price. Let me actually read the quote because I don't want to miss it. Where's this quote? Quote, while the raw materials in a meat-free meal are cheaper, there is so much more labor involved in preparing them that there's no cost savings. So he's basically saying the costs for them turns out to be, let's call it the same for sake of this argument. This actually isn't a cheaper to execute menu, right? When you buy a vacuum-sealed hunk of A5 Wagyu, or the backdoor knocks and a styrofoam box of tins of caviar on ice come in, or whole ducks that you plan on putting on a hook and aging and then just roasting them whole, you can do a 2 to 4x markup on those ingredients and create relationships with those purveyors to maybe drive your cost down a bit. You can consistently get the product delivered, kind of rotate through that product. You can create and iterate a few signature dishes, and bam, that's been the blueprint for a lot of people going from wherever they are to getting Michelin stars. I'm not saying that entire process is easy, but there's a blueprint for it. And comparing that process of all those luxury ingredients coming in, those luxury animal products coming in, comparing that process to anyone who's ever been a commis that's had to process vegetables from the farm, or if you've ever had a station where you're responsible for the vegetable garnish, it's not the same thing. Like, most line cooks know that being on a protein station is so much more intimidating to a certain extent because of the cost of the ingredients and the margin for error on internal temperatures of the proteins. It's the people who have to peel the tomatoes or make the onion petals or perfectly clean the radishes or shingle the turnip slices or make a perfectly smooth and bright green spinach puree. If anything, I'm hoping this motivates restaurants that are doing this combination of sourcing incredible product and doing above and beyond culinary work in their kitchens to raise their prices. Because I don't think it's unreasonable for someone to say, look at this article and they're saying to themselves, we do just as much work as 11 Madison Park, and their food cost is 18% because they're doing this plant-based menu. Our food cost is 35% because we're using foie and halibut and crab and caviar. Let's raise our prices a little bit. And getting onto that second point, the piece about 11 Madison Park not being the first plant-based restaurant with a tasting menu, I covered it at the top here. I don't necessarily agree that's the best take, because none of these other places who have driven plant-based food forward have managed to build the infrastructure to be awarded 3 Michelin stars consistently, right? Just because you can compare the category of ingredients on Dirt Candy and 11 Madison Park's menu doesn't mean you're going to get the same experience at both. Just not true. And I'm not talking shit on Dirt Candy, because she's been a maverick in making vegetables a star. She's clearly run her business for years, talking about consistency. And she's made a lot of impactful changes to how she runs her business. I don't know Chef Amanda, but there's clearly something in her that she rejects 3 Michelin stars. She doesn't want to charge a lot of money. I saw this post that she made circulating around on Twitter where she was basically apologizing for raising her price on her tasting menu. I think it was from like $55 to $85 per person for her menu. It's like, charge what you need to charge, right? And I think this fallacy that like losing money and being a martyr for your food is the only way to get respect is harmful. It's actually toxic. It causes problems, ripple effects down the line. And so I go in the reverse with something like this. I very much so think that the quality of the experience at 11 Madison Park, between the atmosphere of the dining room, the tableside presentations, if they're going to keep that going, the kitchen tour, being able to have a drink in their gorgeous bar, having these insane preparations that they're probably working on and flavor combinations that they're creating, and not to mention even the wine program, the front of house hospitality, it's all going to be worth the money, in my thoughts. Again, I haven't been there. I've eaten at 11 Madison Park in the protein days, had a full tasting menu. I've been there for drinks multiple times. It's going to be a great experience in the same way that going to Noma during vegetable season always seems to look incredible and inspiring, and every chef that is worth their creative salt looks at those dishes and they're like, fuck, man, that's fucking cool that they're doing that. So we're just going to have to see what happens. Continuing on, I have more points. The only point that I've seen circulating that is a change I hope to see is in relation to the question of, we don't have data on this yet. People are saying, okay, well, if it's $335 a person for the vegetable menu, and you're telling us that labor becomes your biggest expense, do you plan to pay your staff more? And that's yet to be seen. I certainly hope that's the case. I'm not saying that we have to, completely put people's salaries through the roof, but this comes to an unfortunate concept that I've been grappling with kind of during this pandemic, and I haven't really shared this, but I plan on writing about it and making videos on it because I've been having these in siloed conversations with other friends of mine, whether it's like after a podcast interview or on a phone call. And it's in line with the concept of leverage that I've covered on previous podcasts with Chris Spear. And this is a way of looking at the world from Naval Ravikant. He says, businesses and people can apply leverage in one of 3 ways. Media or product leverage, that's number 1. So media or product leverage, examples of that is like Joe Rogan's podcast, or Beyonce's album that you stream on Spotify, or the new app that you just downloaded on your phone. Those are all examples of that type of leverage. Then there's capital leverage, aka money leverage. Basically, this includes taking a leverage position in a financial trade, buying real estate, being able to put up money to allow a team to execute without having to, make profit. Those types of examples are capital leverage. And then the last type of leverage is labor leverage or human leverage. And that's where most restaurants play, in the human capital. They try to leverage human labor in order to, spread their ideas or achieve, some semblance of scale. And in any of these examples, media, capital, or human, the person who can get the cheapest leverage usually can get ahead faster. And notice I didn't say win, I said get ahead faster. People in the product world or the media world, they look for the cheapest clicks they can get or the cheapest distribution they can get when it comes to media. People in the capital world, you're always looking to borrow with the smallest amount of interest. You're trying to get the cheapest money you can find, the littlest down payment you can find. And in labor, you guessed it, you're looking for the folks that you can pay the least. And in restaurants and industries outside of ours that also use human leverage, this becomes the norm. And so unfortunately, I don't see there being proper incentive structures in place, even with this change happening, to make it worth it for 11 Madison Park to look at the constantly revolving door of labor and say, yep, we're going to pay more. Because they don't have to, right? There's a line out the door of people who are not just willing, but excited to spend 6 months, 3 months, a year working there for less than market, take those skills, go off and do something else. And we can argue the morality of that until the cows come home. But they're effectively using, 11 Madison Park is using their product leverage and their capital leverage, the product being the reputation and the brand of the 3 Michelin-starred, New York Times accoladed 11 Madison Park, that's the first one, and the capital being their rolling capital, their profits from previous seasons. They have a ton of investors in their ecosystem to float them during the pandemic and allow them to take risks like this to achieve that labor leverage. And that's their business model. And listen, I've had dear friends of mine work at 11 Madison Park, and it's either given them life-changing industry experience, they have a massive network of people now, and they now have the resume to move wherever they want. Maybe they learned some amazing techniques, they learned how to work clean, and they got to live in New York City. And it's all their decision. They're not being forced to do this. And they were able to take value from that experience, and it wasn't strictly monetary. Maybe they didn't get paid amazingly, but look at all those other things that they got. It's part of the experience. And that's what makes it a win for both parties. And as long as that exists, I find it hard to believe that they're going to flip it all on its head and, change it, everything, in some structural way. Maybe 11 Madison Park gets approached by a New York media company and they're able to get more media leverage, or they come out with more cookbooks or what have you. But that's kind of my rant on the current state of labor leverage in the industry and why we're seeing this dynamic consistently play out of how can you use other types of leverage to get cheap labor. And that's just how it is. And I realize that I'm saying two things out of the same mouth. I want people to get paid more. I want there to be more opportunities for people. But I also lived that life of being young and hungry and wanting to squeeze the most out of an experience that I could. And I felt like I was getting an equal trade on the other side. If you're someone, to harken back to our last story, if you feel like Lummi Island can do that for you, and you can go work there for a little while, take those skills and go do something of your own, then it might be an equal trade for you. If it's a case of you grew up on Lummi Island and your mom wants you to go get a dishwashing job and you have no desire to work your way up the brigade or be a chef and you're just getting exploited because you know what I mean? Different scenario, same working environment, different relationship. And so I don't look at staging or working for free as a bad thing, or working for less than, whatever the normal salary would be, as a bad thing, because I didn't work in those environments forever. I spent time there, I took what I could, and then I moved on. So, again, there's a little bit of context and nuance, and we know the world doesn't like nuance. Okay, continuing on. Quote, this is another interesting piece. Quote, the cost of every meal served of these $335 will incorporate the cost of producing additional meals for hungry New Yorkers. He first did this with a pickup service his team created in October, 11 Madison Humm. When the restaurant reopens, each tasting menu will cover the cost of 5 meals and be delivered by 11 Madison Park truck, run by the same team that is cooking the high-priced meals. Everyone who, quote, everyone who touches EMP, the staff, the guests, the purveyors, will help feed the city, end quote. That's from Daniel Humm at the end. And this is the other piece in the announcement that really tripped people up, I think, because it's these opposing forces, right, of can't afford a meal that's literally 2 orders of magnitude higher than what a regular meal costs. It's very expensive. And on the other hand, it's using funds and resources from that project to engage folks that need help. And so this next quote provides a little bit more context. Quote, "Now, Chef Humm was confronted with a set of goals that seemed to contradict each other. He wanted to run a restaurant that offered guests an experience that was elegant and delicious and as magical as possible. But he also wanted to embrace all of New York, including the poorest and most needy. And he began to realize he wanted to embed his ethical commitments to the food itself. Our practices of animal production, what we're doing to the oceans, and the amount we consume, it's just not sustainable. If 11 Madison Park is truly at the forefront of dining and culinary innovation, to me it's crystal clear that this is the only place to go next." End quote. And a little bit of that, like, malice was attributed to, like, oh, well, you're giving these meals away for free and you have the resources to do that and you're making people work more, but you can't afford to pay them more. And we haven't seen that yet. You know what I mean, everybody? Like, we don't know what that's going to look like. And again, even if that's the case and you get the chance to work in this, like, super high speed, high caliber kitchen, and then you get to do this thing for good on the side, if you do it for a year or two while you're young and single, it could really set you up to do some really cool things later on, you know? So, like, where's the line is my question. And so where do my thoughts land here overall? What's the lesson? What's up with Daniel Humm wearing this $2,000 white designer coat on a farm? I think they thought this through immensely. I'm sure there were countless meetings about this. I think that the split that happened between Will Guidara and Daniel Humm put 11 Madison Park in a semi-vulnerable place. Combo that with COVID, and I think that puts increased pressure on the kitchen to charge ahead with a creative vision, because it's not just on both sides of the house. It's now solely on the kitchen. And ultimately, I think Humm is probably wanting to make the restaurant a place where New Yorkers get excited about going again after COVID, right? And what's trendier now than a concept that gives back, a concept that's plant-based, a concept that's intentionally hamstringing themselves in the name of working within constraints? That's all trendy right now. And I can only imagine that there isn't immense pressure on them to make tons of money because, you know, they have this infrastructure financially of investors, and remaining relevant is much more considered here over profit. And in a city that's so who's who as New York, and it's so relationship focused, I think they're going to be just fine. And him wearing that coat, that white designer coat on the farm, playing with dirt and goats, is right in line with that. It's so fucking smart. He wants to be the person that the Soho apartment dweller who's never considered going to 11 Madison Park because they saw it as this stuffy midtown Manhattan place looks at Daniel Humm in that article and says, I kind of want to go try that. I think it's a play at a younger audience. I think you aren't going to sell them on this super masculine, fly in the Wagyu, white tablecloth style experience. Put the chef in a designer coat, photograph them playing with goats, and give back to the community from a plant-based menu execution. It's like that Drake meme, right? Like, I don't want the super masculine thing, but then it's like, oh yeah, I want that one. And quickie last quote, I want to make sure I get the quote right from the beginning. Oh, I already did the quote about the pricing piece, about how labor is going to make up for the cost savings, quote unquote, that they might be making with ingredients. So, as always, this show isn't just about my thoughts. I want to hear what you have to say as well. So please let me know what you're thinking in the comments down below, or tweet at me with #TheEmulsion so I can find you.